Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Now, I have promised that I would be making a recap of the vice presidential debate that took place the other day. Now, I have recapped the first presidential debate that took place. Well, not the one with Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but rather the first presidential debate with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Man, obviously, I've called it an embarrassment. I've called it a clown show, a train wreck. And these last two debates that we've had were so bad that I essentially questioned the integrity on how debates should be ran and if we should even do them anymore. But the vice presidential debate that we had the other day, that debate actually went fairly pretty well. At least that I know of, there was no issues going on. Nobody was talking out of their ass. Both sides looked very convincing. Both sides did a very good job. The moderators were actually playing a fair game, although yeah, they were kind of a little bit biased on some bits. And, they were asking tough questions to both candidates, and I liked that. To be fair, this is how debates should be conducted. Nobody was acting childish. It wasn't a train wreck. It wasn't a clown show. For the most part, it was fair. And aside from one blunder, which we will get into, actually, I found 2 or 3 in this debate that we will talk about. But normally, people don't actually pay attention to the vice presidential debates because people oftentimes ignore the vice presidential debate and focus solely on the presidential debate, even though the vice president is just as important as the role of the president. Although this doesn't necessarily affect polling and whatnot, maybe slightly, but this actually has a lot more implications on who would be a good fit for president in 2028. And we really got to learn more about 2 of these vice presidential candidates. Now, originally, I wanted to give each vice presidential candidate its own videos, thoughts on JD Vance and thoughts on Tim Walz. But when Trump and Harris picked those 2 guys to be their running mate, I wanted to make a video on the day they were announced as their running mate. However, I really do think waiting for the vice presidential debate was a much better idea because it gives us a better, a barometer on what they stand on and how they debate and who they are as a person and what is their future, at least as far as the presidency is concerned. Examining their track record a lot better and seeing more clearly what they stand on. So this vice presidential debate was between JD Vance and Tim Walz. JD Vance being Trump's running mate and Tim Walz being Kamala Harris's running mate. Now, I've watched this whole debate from start to finish. Man, again, like I said, both JD Vance and Tim Walz did a really good job at doing this debate, answering the questions. The balance of pathos, logos, and ethos, the whole 9 yards. They pretty much did what they could, and I would say they did a fairly decent job at it. Now, obviously, depending on who you're voting for, you might say that one guy completely overperformed while the other guy performed like shit. Trump's core fan base is saying that JD Vance won through and through, and Tim Walz just completely bombed, and or vice versa with Harris supporters with, Walz doing good and Vance bad. However, when I was watching this debate, I was pessimistic. I was expecting the worst after what I was just talking about earlier in my previous video, and what I just witnessed the last 2 presidential debates. However, we didn't get a train wreck debate. Tim Walz, even though I don't really like the guy, Tim Walz definitely surprised me. I wouldn't say he was oh my god, he's awesome, but he did fairly good. I would give him a 5 out of 10 for his debate. He's definitely a much better debater than Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and certainly better than Hillary Clinton. I wouldn't say he's the best on stage, but he's definitely pretty good. At first, he sounded very, very shaky around the first 15 or 30 minutes of the debate, but it didn't sound he was panicking and whatnot. Like I said, between Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris, he's one of the better debaters. And there were even times when watching this debate that I actually agreed with what Tim Walz was saying. When talking about the economy, he almost has what I would call a populist viewpoint when it comes to the economy. A John Fetterman type, if you know what I mean. Yeah, of course, I support decentralization. I support tax cuts to the working class. As someone who's pro-family, we should have paid family leave. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily help when we're sending all of our money to countries that are halfway across the world from us because they're actively in conflict that we pretty much have no business in being involved with. Not to mention, illegals getting funding as well. But I did end up seeing myself haphazardly semi-agreeing with what Walz is saying, at least economically speaking. I'm not fully agreeing with it, but there are some things that I do like. But then we move on to like the conversation of guns. Walz also did mention something that I keep mentioning all the time when I talk about the conversation of guns and the Second Amendment. Tim Walz mentioned that there are countries like Switzerland and Finland which have high gun ownership, but they don't have any mass shootings. Although Finland, I remember, did have one not too long ago. This was in 2007, where this anti-religion YouTuber named Sturmgeist89 went in and killed a bunch of people at his old high school. But this had nothing to do with guns necessarily. If you remember and you've watched this kid on YouTube, you can obviously tell he was screwed in the head. Not to mention, he used a pistol, not an AR-15. I don't think it's legal to own these weapons in Finland, if I remember correctly. That's still enough to show you that this is entirely a culture problem. Tim Walz is on the right track with this. But you also want to keep in mind, this guy strongly supports an assault weapons ban. Tim Walz has in the past called for very strict gun control, including taking guns away. So he is pretty anti-gunner, but he uses some, great talking points in terms of talking about guns in the US. Like, you can use his same arguments to debate against gun control, and that's exactly what JD Vance did in this debate. Tim Walz also fails to mention that there are countries that are more restrictive on guns, but have higher crime and murder rates. And there are even countries that have lower gun restrictions, but also have a lower murder rate and lower crime rates. And most gun violence deaths are not necessarily caused by just rifles, the vast majority of which are caused by handguns, either from gang violence, robberies, and heists. And a lot of those handguns are obtained illegally. I've actually mentioned this on my video about gun control, which I will pin on the upper right-hand corner. And even JD Vance himself mentions that in the debate. Oh, and before we move on, I also forgot to mention, when Tim Walz was being asked about gun safety, something slipped out, and this, I think, ultimately ruined Tim Walz's performance in this debate. And some of you guys who have watched this debate may have already heard and know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, I'm not going to explain what happened. Instead, I'm just going to show you this clip right over here, and you'll see what I mean.
You previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. So I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I've become friends with school shooters.
Your ears did not deceive you. You actually did just hear what you just heard. I'm just going to keep this as short as I possibly can, and then afterwards we'll move on and talk about JD Vance's performance, along with other issues that were being discussed. But Christ on a stick. Tim Walz saying, "I've become friends with school shooters," that stings. That does not sound like a good look in that debate. I don't know what Walz was trying to say. I don't know if he misspoke. I don't know. But when you say that exact line on national TV when talking about guns, I just don't know. That's kind of fucking weird, bro. As someone who has been affected by gun violence before, who knows people who are killed in these situations, Tim, you got some explaining to do. This is just as bad, if not worse, than Kamala Harris comparing January 6th to 9/11. Tim Walz saying he's friends with school shooters? That may have only been the big fuck up from Walz so far. Arguably the biggest fuck up from Walz. Again, I don't know what he was trying to say or what he was attempting of trying to say, but that right there just showed signs of, lack of preparation, because shit you're on national TV and shit like that can be taken out of context very easily. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that real quick because I think that was just completely outlandish and just outright stupid that just came out of Walz's mouth. That essentially just deducted a lot of points from him. I mean, if it weren't for that one incident, I'd give him a 6.5 out of 10. But outside of that one stupid gaffe alone, if you just take that out, I think, Tim Walz definitely surprised me in this debate when talking about certain issues. But JD Vance, on the other hand, really did steal the show. If you would have asked me who won this debate, I'd easily point to JD Vance. That guy can debate very well. Like, when I was watching this debate and I was seeing and listening to JD Vance, answering some of these questions and talking about his viewpoints on certain issues, he reminds me a lot of Ron DeSantis back in the 2018 gubernatorial election. In fact, JD Vance does kind of remind me of Ron DeSantis. And there's even some points where I was agreeing with what JD Vance is saying. And to be fair, after this debate, I kind of like the dude. Like, to be honest, if he was running in 2028, I'd be supporting him. He's got the libertarianism of Ron Paul. He's got the populism of Ron DeSantis. He's also got Trump populism in there. He's America first. He ticks all the boxes that I want in a US president. I can even argue that he is so much better than Trump. And he is. He debates way better than Donald Trump. Like, this dude can debate very well. And I was able to identify and analyze a lot of his viewpoints, and I definitely agree with a lot of them. For instance, when talking about climate change, and I don't understand how the moderators brought up climate change right when they talk about Hurricane Helene. If anything, the question regarding Helene should be, what do you plan on doing to make sure people are more prepared when dangerous storms like Hurricane Helene come in and it causes catastrophic wreckage like what we're seeing in North Carolina and Tennessee? Like, what do you plan on doing to make sure that FEMA has all the resources that it needs to make sure that it's prepared when a natural disaster strikes? But it seems like every time a hurricane hits and they mention the hurricane, or like when tornadoes hit, they always seem to bring up climate change, as if category 3, 4, and 5 hurricanes didn't even exist before the Industrial Revolution. But when Vance talks about climate change, it isn't like, like he's denying it or whatever. He talks about his own solutions, and I agree with his solutions on bringing manufacturing right back down here. Like, we need to bring back all our industrial and our manufacturing jobs. And he didn't specifically say fossil fuels necessarily when he's talking about the issues of climate change. He also mentioned, like, there's wind, solar, and all these other clean alternatives that you can use alongside traditional fossil fuels. And he even admits in the debate that he's a big environmentalist. Like, he mentions that we need clean air, clean water, clean oceans. There's plastic in our oceans. We have a lot of pollution in our air. Some of these factories can sometimes produce toxic chemicals into the air. It's not just exclusively carbon gases. But it's not like, we need to completely stop cold turkey. Human civilization in this current timeline still needs fossil fuels to function properly. And Vance mentions that we shouldn't completely ban fossil fuels because, those manufacturing jobs can be moved to other countries which pollute even more than the US. You might see these numbers come down, but that doesn't mean numbers globally are going to come down. In fact, they don't even change whatsoever, or they're just going to continue to rise up. China and India are some of the biggest polluters in the world. There are even some days that China doesn't even have clean air most of the time. If we really want to seriously start tackling this issue and take it more seriously, we should be telling those countries to cut down their carbon emissions too. They don't get a pass. But the whole idea Vance was trying to make in this debate is take all those manufacturing jobs, bring them back here, and diversify our energy. And it doesn't stop at, wind and solar energy. We definitely should be investing in nuclear energy, which studies show have been proven to be clean as long as you use naturally occurring and recyclable radioactive elements like uranium, polonium, thorium, and protactinium. Radium, not so much, because it's soluble in water, so that can become an issue. Vance made a very clear point about nuclear energy. Nuclear energy needs more investment. Why aren't there more polonium reactors in the world? It's recyclable. But outside of that, if we bring manufacturing here, it's not going to be that big of an issue. And it's not like clean alternatives exist already. We can always have a hybrid system. You don't always have to rely on one source or another. You can just operate everything 50-50, like, 50% on coal and oil and 50% on wind and solar. Why hasn't anybody thought of that idea? And on abortion, he made it clear. Nobody in this country wants to see a national abortion ban. If it were to happen, it would be vetoed. Looking at you, Lindsey Graham. I know nowadays it's controversial to say it, but abortion shouldn't necessarily be banned. A lot of Americans can agree on that. However, it should not be extended well beyond the third trimester and be late term. Like the story of Amber Thurman is a perfect outlier of what we need to do about abortion. If there's any given situation where your life is in danger and you need to have like a baby aborted because you and the life of the baby are both under threat, that's when it should be done. There should in no way be a ban on that whatsoever. Even countries like Poland and Hungary, which are known to be very restrictive on abortion, has this. Abortions are still performed even in the case of a dire emergency, and are actually supposed to be carried out anyway. And again, if we take a look at the rest of Europe, abortion is fully legal there. However, they don't have late-term abortions, and they don't have people like, getting them all the time. Because, there are some at least moderate restrictions there too. It's not completely and fully unrestricted. Point is, in America, abortion should be safe, legal, but rare. And that's what 90% of what Americans want. Safe, so that way people cannot die from a botched abortion like with Amber Thurman. She had no choice and she had to get one because her and that child's life were both under threat and it needed to be done. She had to get one, but it was not only too late, but it was also completely botched. Abortion should be safe. Abortion should be legal. There's no way government should be forced to make people's decisions for them. And this goes with everything. You can't force a gay person to be straight. You can't force a straight person to be gay. You can't force anything on anyone. And there are some school districts who completely forgot the memo, especially with the whole indoctrination that we've been seeing lately. Politics and religion should be kept out of schools at all times, both left and right. So it should be safe and it should be legal, but it also should be rare. Stories like Thurman should not happen. Stories like kids at a very young age being abused by criminals should not happen. And protection must be used at all times to prevent one from happening. Life begins on conception, and there's no reason to kill once it's been conceived. Safe, legal, but rare. So yes, I like what Vance said there. We in no way want to see a national abortion ban passed, no matter what. And that's the way it should be. So yes, I technically speaking understand Walz's viewpoints as well. Why ban it? But at the same time, we shouldn't allow it to be stretched over to, the third trimester and stretch it over beyond 9 months. That's impractical. I mean, Vance does have a point. It is barbaric. There needs to be a middle ground on this issue. Keep it legal. Do not ban it. In fact, most voters in different states are passing abortion bills anyway. Nobody wants to see it banned, but at the same time, there needs to be a time limit. It needs to be between the first and second trimesters. So that's around 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 months at the latest. So that's plenty of time. It shouldn't be stretched beyond 6 months already. 6 months should be the limit. Keep everything legal, and most importantly, the states should be able to decide that issue on their own. The voters of the states should be able to decide on that, but it needs to be kept legal. No way we should see it banned nationwide. So Walz, the problem that I have is that his state and his supporters want it beyond the 6-month total. That's too much. It needs to be performed at the early trimesters, and that's how it should be. Now, I notice a lot of Vance supporters calling out the moderators for being a little too biased. And this being a 3-on-1 debate just like what we saw last time. While it did seem like a 3-on-1 debate on certain points, like I said earlier on, I think this was called pretty fairly. They may have attacked Vance a little too much, but they weren't going too easy on Tim Walz either. In fact, the moderators actually called out Tim Walz for his claims that he was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre, which actually turned out to be a lie, and that he wasn't in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre. And to put more salt in the wound, Hong Kong was not a part of China during the Tiananmen Square massacre. It was still a British overseas territory. And they even got Walz to admit that yes, he did lie, he wasn't in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre, and he wasn't in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre. Now, obviously, these debates cannot go on too long, and there's only so much that the moderators can talk about and ask questions about. Like, I really wanted to see them touch up on LGBTQ issues. We would have saw a lot of interesting things come out of that. Like, who knows, we would have saw JD Vance directly attack Tim Walz about wanting to add tampons in men's restrooms and wanting to have men play in women's sports. And then Tim Walz, on the other hand, would attack JD Vance about him claiming that trans people shouldn't exist or that he's a homophobe and whatnot. That would have been a very fascinating and interesting shit show to watch. And it would already make this video much longer than it already is. But yeah, that was the debate, summed up. The only vice presidential debate that we're getting this year. JD Vance versus Tim Walz. Now, there are some honorable mentions that I will touch up on briefly. Like topic on immigration, JD Vance touches up on the opioid epidemic that has plagued his state of Ohio for quite some time now. You know, he touches up on the drug flow on the border. Of course, you got the Springfield, Ohio debacle that happened between the two. Again, I will save that dog and cat eating story for a separate video. I'm not going to talk about it here. I also briefly talked about it on my other debate video since that was mentioned in that debate as well. But who won this debate? Even viewing this on a neutral perspective, I would say JD Vance. Not because I, like the dude, but I think he did such a great job in this debate. He was a really good debater. And, I'm not discrediting Tim Walz. He did what he could. Again, if that whole friends with school shooter thing didn't happen, I'd give him a little bit of a better score. Like, I give Tim Walz a 4 to a 5 out of 10 for his debate performance. I give JD Vance an 8 out of 10. He was calm, cool, collected. He accurately answered the questions that he was asked. He explained and articulated very well. He was precise with everything that he was saying, and he wasn't talking out of his ass for the majority of the time. He's actually very smart, and he's intelligent. And that debate just showed. And even me looking at this at a neutral perspective, I really liked what he had to say. Like, I like what he said about big tech censorship in the First Amendment. Because I've made countless videos of these situations happening, like with the Act Man and Quantum TV when they had their little beef. The Act Man got completely removed off the partner program and got his video deleted on Quantum TV because in that video there's a picture of Quantum TV photoshopped with a cucumber in his mouth. And Quantum TV was doing a lot of illegal shit towards the Act Man, and people were getting censored because they were defending the Act Man and the situation that he got himself into. Or Corey Kenshin, when he got banned off YouTube because he was playing a horror game that had a lot of graphic content. So you get what I mean when I'm talking about big tech censorship. And there's a whole bunch of examples of this too. I like what JD Vance had to say about big tech censorship. Regardless of what you say or what you believe, I don't support censorship. So I do respect that. But yeah, this was a good debate. JD Vance was the clear winner here. And we'll see what comes after this. We're just 5 weeks from the election. Time is going by really quickly, so it's crunch time for both of these political candidates. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you're new around here, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to follow me on all my social medias. Links are in the description below. Share this video around with your friends, families, boyfriends, girlfriends, enemies, whomever. Definitely helps me out a lot, helps the video grow, and helps grow the channel if you were to share this video with whomever you know. Again, we are 5 weeks from the election. Every Friday or Saturday, I'm going to try to do weekly polling analysis up until the election. So that way I can keep y'all up to date with everything regarding this election. And especially this month, there's going to be a lot more content coming your way. Because again, I am your news guy. That's what I do. Try to keep you guys up to date with everything that I can. Whether that be for election news, current events, or internet drama, I got you covered. And this is why you should subscribe to the channel. I'm still getting close to 150. Make sure y'all get me there before election day. So make sure you are subscribed and make sure those notifications are turned on so that way you won't miss any October surprise that comes your way. So yeah, anyways, like, subscribe, ring notifications, and until then, take care, talk soon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. You're awesome.